Good morning. Welcome to Freeway Bible Study. My name is Kurt Bell. I'm your host. Today's the 27th day of April. Ooh, bike felt like it had a hard start there. And we are studying Genesis 37. Let me just make sure I got everything going. Looks good, looks good. This is the story of Judah and his experiences with his family, most notably his daughter-in-law. Let's move. So Judah, of course, is one of Jacob's sons. Well, there's a couple of sons. He has 12 sons in all, and some of the most notable names, of course, are Reuben, his firstborn, Judah, who features in this chapter, Joseph, the boy with the coat of many colors, and a few others that kind of make minor bit pieces here and there, but this story is all about Judah. So Judah, for some reason, decides to leave his family and go to the home of an Adullamite, I think they're called, who I think is a cousin of sorts. And he's got a friend down there, and he goes down to live with this guy, and he decides to marry one of the Adullamite's daughters. And by that daughter, he has 3 sons. Now, as things, fast forward a decade or two, and the sons are of marriageable age, at least the first 2 sons are. And the first one is Judah marries her off to his friend's daughter. Remember the friend I told you about, the Adullamite? It's key. It's key for a minor point, but it's an interesting point. It'll show up later. So he marries her to his friend's daughter, and God steps in because this friend's this first son, I think his name was Er. That's right. His first name, the first son was Er. I think A-R. And it's probably the last name of this chapter I'm going to be able to remember. Look at all this traffic. What up? So he marries, goodness gracious, what is going on? I think I'll take the express route. He marries Er, and God doesn't like Er very much, so guess what? He kills him. Which, when I read that, I was like, whoa, what about, free will? So, now God's, executing you just for being wicked? Well, I guess there's past precedent for that, right? So Er is gone. So now Judah has a daughter-in-law who hasn't born any children yet, and he's probably got perhaps a dowry to consider, right? I mean, if he sends the daughter back, I don't know if he can, but if he does send the daughter back to her father, he may lose that dowry. So he's got a reason to keep her around. And I looked into it, did a little research, little scholarship, so to speak, and found out that there were customs. I think they were called Levantian customs or something like that. No, Levirate. That's right, Levirate customs. And I guess the woman in question would be called the lever. And I know Levirate, I think, isn't that a soap, a hand soap? But anyway, the Levirate custom was all over the Middle East and the Near East, all the way from, including Assyria, Persia, and also the Hebrew culture. And the Levirate customs were exactly to deal with the case where a husband might die before any children are sired. And the custom basically was to provide for the wife a couple of things. Probably, first of all, was to protect the bride price or the dowry. So, second of all, was to ensure the line. Or maybe number one reason was to ensure the line, make sure that the inheritance went through properly, that the family would have a namesake, And the third purpose was to provide for the the widow. And basically the practice was to find another man for the widow. And that man could come from a variety of sources. It could be the deceased husband's brother, their father, for example, or what was the last one? The son. There was a third one, I thought, but I can't quite remember what it was. So in this case, so the heir dies, and I'm sorry, I'm picking my words carefully because it's complicated. This is causing my brain to work fast, but my speech to move slow. So heir dies, leaving Levi's. Is it Levi? No, I can't remember. Judah. Leaving Judah's, and this is not the Judah from the New Testament, of course. Leaving Judah's daughter-in-law without a husband. So he's got a house, Judah's got a household, now he's got a daughter in there without a husband. It's one extra mouth to take care of and no sons to show for it. But he's got the bride price, so he better find someone to finish the job of getting that gal pregnant and get her with a son. So he taps the shoulder of his second son, who's of age, and says, go in and sleep with your daughter. That's literally what it says in the New International Version. Go in and sleep with your daughter. In the King James it says, of course, go in unto her, so that you can provide, so she can have a son. And he seems reluctant, because in so doing, he will be producing a son that will be not his son, but his brother's son, right? And subject to the inheritance, he will basically, if we just take it one step further, we can see the reason why he would want to do this. A lot of guys would be like, whoa, no problem, right? I get to have all the fun, and someone else has to do all the, raise the kid. Well, he kind of would have to raise the kid, so to speak, but there's more to it than that. With the one brother dead, remember, there's 3 sons. With the one brother dead, the second son and the third son stand to inherit, to split the inheritance of their father, Judah. If he sires a son by his brother's widow, then that son will be in line to inherit a third. So he's literally going to split his fortune by that's going to be a very costly good time, right? So he's got a little bit of a motive not to get her pregnant. So thinking it's on the sly, he goes, and it's more than once, because the Bible says he goes in until he sleeps with her. Every time he sleeps with her, he pulls out. You all know what that means, right? And spills his seed on the ground. And I was reading that some translate that to mean that he was masturbating, but I can't see how they could possibly that was used as an injunction against masturbation, of which there is no such mention in the Bible of anything about masturbation, but people have used that, and I can't see how they can possibly get that from that, because it's clear that he's pulling out. I mean, that ain't masturbating. it's birth control, for gosh sake. So he spills the seed on the ground, and I guess God's not very happy with that at all, because he then goes ahead and kills that brother too. God must have been having a bad year. Woke up on the wrong side of eternity that year, killing people for pretty otherwise simple things. If he did that today, good gosh. But so I wonder if how much the story plays in the Catholic interest in preserving every seed. Their insistence on not using contraceptives, and of course the contribution to Monty Python's famous skit, "Every sperm is sacred," and so on. So now, strike 2, right? So now Judah's second son is dead, and you got to kind of wonder, why it's, is it the woman? Although that question doesn't come up, right? I mean, you go in under her, and you go in under the ground in pretty short order. Although only God knows the reason. And how did the people writing the story know the reason? That's an interesting question that didn't come up before. But how would the people who wrote this story know that God killed the first son for his sin, and they killed the second son because he he laid it down on the ground. Anyway, let's set that aside. So now, Judah's in a tricky spot. He's only got one son left, and that son is juvenile, not old enough to get married. So he tells his daughter-in-law, why don't you go up and live with your dad and live the life of a widow until my third son is old enough for you to marry. Then you can marry him too. And now maybe I understand a little bit why he didn't actually give the woman to the youngest son, because maybe he was indeed afraid that that connection would kill him. So anyways, so she does that. So she goes up. Now remember, her father is the Adullamite Judah first came to the area to see, and by which he met his wife that produced the sons. Right? Right. Is that right? Yes, that's right. That's right. So, why do I have a feeling I may not be getting that right? It's complicated. I had to read it. I took 2 days. Usually I take 1 day on each chapter, but I needed 2 days to digest this chapter, even though it's a very short chapter, because there's a complex narrative going on here, and I was struggling to keep it all straight in my head. But I'm pretty sure that the Adullamite that Judah came to this land to hang out with is the father of the woman that he married his sons to. So she says, go back to my buddy, your dad, hang out as a widow, put on your widow's garb, your widow's clothing, until my third son is old enough, and we'll get you guys hooked up. And that's what goes on. Now, in the years between, it's going to take some years, so some years fast forward, some years in the fast forward machine, and the third son is now a man, and he's old enough. He could indeed be, he's of marriageable age, and maybe Judah's holding off, like we said before, because he's afraid that, something bad will happen to him if he marries or goes in unto his this woman. So or maybe he just forgot. He's getting old anyway. But anyway, Judah's wife dies, right? So now Judah's a widow. And around this time, it's time to go, take in the sheep. It's whatever they do. It's not harvest time. It's sheep shearing time or something like that. They got to go tend to the sheep, whatever shepherds do. And so he heads off. He's a widow, so he heads off, and he grabs his buddy, the Adullamite, right? Now, didn't he live someplace else? Because I thought the Adullamite, I thought he sent his daughter-in-law to live with her father, the Adullamite, but I guess they were living in the same area. But for whatever reason, I guess he and the Adullamite are pretty close. So he says, I guess he's like, hey, I'm going to head on up to wherever to tend the sheep, to shear the sheep, or whatever shepherds do. Why don't you come along? And the Adullamite says, yeah, sounds pretty good. So off they go. Now, somehow, before I get there, so now word gets to the woman that Judah's son, his third son, is old enough to marry, but she hasn't yet been given to him, and she's a little bit upset about that, right? Because she's waited all this time. It's her thing. Back then, a woman's primary thing, her life was having children, in particular sons, and she's been waiting all this time, wandering around in the widow's garb, whatever that looks like, so maybe some black shawl or something like that. She's ready for this to come to an end, hook her up with the third son. What is that down there? Is that what the heck? Interesting. I see something down there in the bushes. Anyway, hook her up with the third son and let her life get started, so to speak. So she hears that, that Judah's on his way to take care of the sheep, and she's a little upset because he hasn't given her his third son. So she comes up with a plan. She puts aside her widow's garb, or she grabs another costume, maybe another regular clothing, and she goes off to the road where she knows that Judah is going to be traveling, and she sits beside the road. First, she changes out of her widow's garb into her regular clothes. She covers her face, and she sits beside the road. Now, I guess that, just like today, if you're driving along and you see a woman standing beside the road, I mean, that can be symbolic of what that woman's interests are, or what her profession is. And I guess the same was true back then. If a woman's all by herself by the side of the road, she's probably a prostitute. And so she's basically laying in wait for Judah to come by. And sure enough, here he comes. Nice old Judah coming on by. Now, I was a little confused because I thought Judah was traveling with the Abimelech, right? Or not the Abimelech, the Adullamite, right? I thought they were traveling together, but somehow Judah's separate. And keep in mind, here's where it all comes together. The Adullamite, if I'm saying it right, that is that woman's father. Now remember, she's covering her face, so her identity is hidden, because of course Judah would recognize her in an instant. So Judah is alone, the woman is alone, and Judah comes to her, approaches her. Hold on, I gotta sneeze. Look at the rocks. Pardon me. Judah approaches her and says, "Hey, good looking." No, he doesn't say that. he says, what does he say? He says, "I want to go in unto you," right? Oh yeah, they're striking a bargain, right? What's the price, right? I could be vulgar right now, but I won't. And she says, and he says, "Well, I'll give you one baby sheep. What do you call those? A lamb from the flock, if you'll let me go in unto you." I mean, it's very straightforward language here. She says, "Oh yeah, that sounds like a pretty good deal. But of course, you don't have the sheep, you don't have the lamb right here, right now. So what will you give me now to hold on to until I get payment?" And he says, "Well, what would you like?" And he says, "Well, why don't you give me your signet, I think it's his bracelet things, and your staff." I think that's what 3 objects. "Why don't you give me those things, and I'll hold on to those until you bring back the sheep." And he says, "Fine, good deal." And they do the nasty. He goes in unto her. I guess he doesn't, unlike his father, he doesn't pull out, because we know that. And they go on. He gives her the goodies, and off they go. And he goes on his way. And she, when he leaves, she puts what is going on there? Oh, fire thing. She puts on her widow's clothes and goes home. Of course, now carrying his seed, and we will learn later that she will conceive from this union. So now remember, she's carrying his signet, his cufflinks, I think it is, and his rod. Now, it turns out that those aren't just decorative items or handy items. These are pretty important things. The rod in particular probably has his seal on it, and this is equivalent to being his wallet in a way, right? It's the God, and it also is the emblem of his authority as the head of the household. I mean, this is huge, that what he's given her. I mean, she must have been a looker for him to pay that, to put down that down payment on going unto her session. And so basically the key point is that these items easily identify who he is. It's as much as giving her his driver's license in the mid-2nd millennium BC. And so she has those things. Now he goes home, or he doesn't go home. He goes back to wherever the Adullamite is, or whatever they're called. Remember his buddy. He finds his buddy and says, "Yo, I don't know if he actually says, he does. He tells her, "Man, I just met the hottest prostitute by the side of the road." And actually, I was wrong yesterday. I indicated that the Hebrew language indicated that she was a shrine prostitute, whereas the English didn't. I was wrong. In the New International Version, it actually does say that she's a shrine prostitute. So that was a distinction that I had wrong yesterday. So he says, "Man, I ran into the hottest shrine prostitute on the way back." Shrine prostitute, of course, would be a prostitute that would hang out in front of the shrines and, make their living off of the pious coming to worship at the shrine. I mean, is there ever can you possibly plumb any deeper depths of irony than that? Yeah, these are some chosen people, all right. So anyway, he says, man, I the hottest shrine prostitute on the road. Had a great time, but I owe her some money. So can you take a goat from the flock and head on back and pay her? I'm just man, she wore me out. Would you mind helping me, my buddy? Remember my man? So he's telling this to the Adullamite, which is his friend, which is also her father. So I guess that tells you something about their relationship, right? In terms of who might be the top dog, or maybe they're just that close that you help a brother out like that. You remember, maybe even back in the day, bros before hoes, right? So he does. So the Adullamite grabs a kid goat or sheep, baby sheep and lamb, and goes back to the place where she should be. But lo, she's not there. But then he asks some of the men in the area, says, where is the shrine whore? I'm sorry, the shrine prostitute. And I use that word, I don't use that word, I'm only using that word, a whore, because it actually uses that word in the Bible. So, because I know it is vulgar, but I'm keeping to the text. It says, where's the shrine prostitute? Let's just settle on that word. And the men say, there's no prostitute here. I guess they would know. Oh, that was a thing. During the time of the shearing of the sheep, because I guess that was a time of the year, like taking in the wheat, taking in the, shearing of the sheep. The prostitutes would typically knew that their men would have to go out to the men of the villages would have to go out to the fields, and they would be away from their women folk, and so they needed the services of women. So shrines would typically go meet them out in the field. So I guess it was a common thing. So and the men knew where all the hotties were. And the men said, there's no shrine prostitute in that area. We don't know what you're talking about. So he can't find her. It's just a good thing, because if he'd found her, what a surprise that would have been, right? Because it's his daughter. So he goes back to Judah and says, sorry, bro, can't find her. So I brought the sheep back. And Judah's a little upset for his honor, because he wants to make sure he pays her. He literally says in the New International Version, if we let her keep what I gave her, lest we be a laughing stock in the community. So I mean, this is like community knowledge that this was going on, and he's concerned that people will think that he was dare I say, Jewing her, because he is an early Jew. That he was, withholding her his payment. And so he says, just let her keep what things she got, which remember is the signet, the cufflinks, and the staff, which are basically, she can keep my driver's license, for that. Well, little good that'll do her, except, she can't run around with that staff, right? It's got his name on it. So, I mean, yeah, not much of a payment. She's much better off with the sheep. But that's not what she was after, was it? We're not just sure what she was after. Maybe she got exactly what she wanted, because 3 months later, lo and behold, she's showing signs of being pregnant. And at that point, word gets back to Judah. They say, someone comes to Judah and says, hey, Judah, remember that widowed daughter of your first 2 sons that you sent back to live with her dad until your 3rd son was old enough? Guess what? She's been playing the whore. That's literally what it says in the Bible. She's been playing the whore, and she is pregnant. Now that really tips Judah off. I mean, he can't tolerate that one bit, and his response is, let her be brought out and burned. Now I looked it up. It took me 2 days to get through this, because I was curious to do some research. I looked it up, and it turns out that burning was indeed a punishment for some very extreme crimes in the mid-second millennium BC in that area, in particular for adultery. But of course they only burned the women, apparently. And that was a really serious offense. I mean, men got punished too. but like always through history, there seems to be a disproportionate amount of wrath upon women and minorities and slaves, of course. So that wasn't too unusual, although it was unusual. It wasn't usually harsh punishment, but suitable for the crime. So nobody at the time would have argued, burning's what she deserves, right? The damn whore. Sorry to be so liberal with my speech. I'm just in the spirit of the text. So she must have been anticipating this in some way, because, and I hope that she was keeping the signet, the bracelets, and the staff, Judah's stuff, close at hand as she was starting to show, because she must have known this was going to come, and they might come and just drag her off to the burning stake, right? So, well, they probably didn't have a burning stake. They probably had to set something up, and she needed to be able to grab that stuff to make her case, to play her ace, to checkmate time. Because what she does is she grabs those things, and I'm surprised she does it this way, or maybe because she's going in chains or bondage. She sends it to her father-in-law, Judah. Don't you think she would have sent it to her dad, maybe? Or maybe her dad was a bad job, because maybe the dad would have done the same thing. Judah's the one maybe it was a smart move to send it to Judah. So she sends this stuff to Judah and with a note, or the message that says, the man by whom I am pregnant is the owner of these things. And of course, Judah recognizes immediately his own staff and signet and cufflinks, or whatever the heck they are. And it's got his name right on it. He's like, oh, Joe. And note his response. His response is, she has been more righteous than me. I will not go in unto her anymore. And he sets her free. I'll come back to this in a moment. Just put a pin in that right now. She goes on to have 2 sons, one of which sticks his hand out first, and the nurse puts a string around the hand, and it pulls back in, and then the second son, the other one that didn't get the string, comes out. She notes this one came out first, and then the second son comes out, and then the first one, stuck his hand out, came out. So we got, a little bit of a confusion about who was first, who's on Abbott, Q Abbott and Costello, right? Who's on second? What's on third? So, but clearly with the string we know who's first, because that's important to know who's first. And we have the 2 names of the sons, and we're ready for another chapter of the story. And then the story abruptly ends at that point. But I want to rewind back to where we stuck a pin in it just a minute ago, because it's worthwhile to note that Judah's response is that she has been more righteous than me, and I won't sleep with her anymore. Talk about tailor-made justice. No wonder judges shouldn't judge themselves, right? I mean, good gosh. If she was, just think of it in a relative sense. If she alone for her crime was worthy in an instant to be sentenced to burning, and it turns out that she was more righteous than him, then shouldn't he be at least burned and maybe tortured and ahead of that? Oh my gosh! But no, he says, okay, we'll just consider, just consider it all done. Yeah, we're good. I won't sleep with you anymore. Holy crap! Gosh! Again, these are the chosen people. Now, the thing that startles me is, well, maybe this makes sense why God keeps on getting upset and threatening to kill everybody, because these are some pretty badass people, but those are the best that he could find. Weren't there some Hindu monks, living in caves, ascetic monks, living in caves and devoting their lives to the meditation and thoughts of God, that were far more deserving to be the chosen people than these people? Good gosh. Well, okay, we'll let it stop there. That's the end of that particular chapter. And what a chapter it was, huh? Genesis 38. Just 12 more chapters and we're done with Genesis. We'll see how that goes. Thanks for joining me, everybody. I hope you all have a... Oh, I forgot one last thing. The first time I read the Bible, I mistook this story to be Joseph and the whore, and that Joseph gave the whore his coat of many colors. In reading the Bible a second time, I realized now it wasn't Joseph, it was Judah, and it was his coat, it was his signet, his staff, and his cufflinks that he gave. Interesting how a first casual read can miss so much detail. That's a significant detail to overlook, even though it's just detail. But it is important to the story. Rather, I was impugning poor Joseph where he didn't need to be. Not that Joseph's necessarily a good guy anyway, but we'll see. Okay, take care, everybody. Have a wonderful day. Make it a good life. Bye-bye.